On foggy midsummer morning in 1909, two very unlucky Frenchmen flew high on the cliffs near Calais, peering northward, hoping to catch a glimpse of Dover Castle, 16 miles across the strait. Since the Middle Ages, this imposing fortress had stood symbolically as the key to England's insularity and at the same time as a tantalizing challenge for invasion by air, a dream as old as Napoleon Bonaparte. The English Channel had already been crossed by air by no less than 57 persons since 1785. 7 balloons, in fact, arrived in England from Paris in a single day, September 30th, 1905, during the Gordon Bennet Air Race. But as yet, no heavier than air machine had done it. Completion in 1909 of the huge outer harbour at Dover prompted the London Daily Mail's publisher, Lord Alfred Northcliffe, to double a prize offer of £500 for the first aviator to cross the channel. Insularity was already giving way to open commerce. In France, two Burmen accepted the challenge, Hubert Latham and Louis Bleriot. Despite the influence of American biplane designers, both favored the slender, graceful, single-wing aircraft. Latham, first to enter the lists, was a slender, sallow-faced, 26-year-old bachelor, a true continental gentleman flyer and a member of cafe society. He was also a reckless sportsman who tracked tigers in Indochina and drove racing boats at Monaco, capturing prizes in hydroplanes designed by his friend Léon Levavasseur. It was Levavasseur who also created the wonderful V8 M200 engine and fashioned what was hailed as the world's most beautiful aeroplane. It was inevitable that Latham should become his chief pilot. Bleriot, a dour-faced aviation enthusiast, for a time had been associated with an Antoinette factory near Paris, but left to gamble on designing and building his own aircraft. After a successful experiment with ornithopter design, Bleriot built, flew and crashed a succession of experimental models. The first 4 biplanes, next a canard monoplane, and sixth a little tandem monoplane he called Libellule, the Dragonfly. Each time he brought one of his craft down was a struggle for survival, for both man and a machine. With the wings tipped unexpectedly, Bleriot simply dove over to the side onto the wing. Aircraft can be repaired, he shrugged, but myself, mon Dieu, I am irreplaceable. Bleriot's Model 12 carried a 35 horsepower ENV and had a nasty habit of giving him the hot foot. Twice he suffered the 3rd-degree burns from a faulty exhaust system, and finally discarded the Model 12 for Model 11. In his Model 11, Bleriot flew happily behind the engine he believed in, a 3-cylinder radial of 24 horsepower, a creation of Alessandro Anzani, the maker of motorcycle engines. Its 3 cast-iron cylinders were air-cooled by rudimentary cylinder fins, a daring departure from current practice. It was the direct ancestor of such modern radial engines as the Wright Whirlwind and the Pratt Whitney Wasp. Anzani's chief mechanic, Francesco Santarini, had drilled a number of exhaust ports throughout the bottom of the cylinder walls to assist in cooling. Worked well, but escaping gases were accompanied by copious quantities of oil. Bleriot's following masters was frequently oil-soaked at the end of a flight, but at least the engine did not overheat. Latham, actually an Englishman born in France, felt it proper that a French aircraft should win the Daily Mail prize, though as an Englishman he realized that the conquest of the Channel would end England's geographic isolation. He had already crossed the Channel by balloon in 1905, sailing from London Crystal Palace to Paris with his cousin, covering 240 miles in 6.5 hours, and he held the world duration record for monoplanes, staying aloft 1 hour, 7 minutes, 37 seconds in his own planet. With corpulent old Léon Levavasseur, he motored up the French coast to Sandgate in mid-July 1909. Situated high on the chalk cliff overlooking the Strait of Dover, Sandgate had a history of its own. Here was the site of the defunct Channel Tunnel Company, all that remained of an attempt to link France and England by railroad. All was now ready for the Channel flight except the weather. A Marconi wireless station linked Sandgate to Dover. Reporters awaited Latham's arrival at the Lord Warden Hotel. The British Motor Boat Club patrolled one side of the channel. A French torpedo destroyer, Le Harpoon, and a tugboat Le Calaisien stood by on the other. On the Tuesday morning, July 13th, Latham flew around for 6 minutes, circling the field of Sandgate below the cloud deck. The engine ran fine, but the channel remained closed in by a thick fog. Latham could only wait, while at Dover, a growing crowd of watchers impatiently scanned the horizon for his Antoinette. He arose before dawn on Monday morning, July 19th, stepped outside the inn at Sandgate and studied the sky. A grey light, diffused by low mists, gave promise of early clearing. He strolled to the wireless station and asked the telegrapher to check the weather at Dover. At 5:20, it replied, "Can see 10 miles." For the next hour, reporters at Dover thrilled over the exciting news that Latham was actually going to make the flight. The operator at Lord Warden Hotel read off messages as they came in from Sungate. By 6:15, machine was being taken along the road to the starting place at Plank Nuz. A minute later, gun signal to start has been given, and the customs informed. By 6:30, Latham started his engine. He rolled over. By 6:50, he was out of sight of the strongest glasses. 30 minutes later, Latham should have arrived. The worried-over telegrapher worried Sungate at 7:23. Anything yet? When the reply was negative, the worst was feared. Latham had to be down at sea. The British fishery cruiser was dispatched to search the strait. Latham, after vanishing from sight, had circled for altitude to increase his gliding range in the event of engine failure. In the distance, he could see the torpedo destroyer Harpoon steaming furiously for England and trailing a white V-8. A marvelous picture, Latham thought. He trimmed the hand wheels until the Antoinette flew steadily, and reached behind for camera. As he leaned over to snap a picture, he felt a sudden shock. Latham's reaction was typically British. Instantly, I gave up all thought of photography. I could hear more than one of the cylinders misfiring. It was maddening, but I was helpless. Never before had the engine played me such a trick after so short a flight. Sweeping through a gliding turn, he spotted the Harpoon once more and headed for it just as the engine quit altogether. My speed at the moment of impact was about 45 miles per hour. Antoinette settled on the water and floated like a cork. I swung my feet up onto a crossbar to prevent them from getting wet. Then I took out my cigar case, lit a cigar, and waited for the torpedo destroyer to come up. 30 minutes later, the Tacalasian pulled alongside, outracing the Harpoon for the honor of being the first to reach the down aviator. Latham stepped onto a lifeboat and was taken aboard the Harpoon, where he lit still another cigar and watched in dismay as the Calasian crew further damaged the Antoinette, swinging it aboard the derrick. Back at Calais, Latham received a hero's welcome. He motored alone to Paris that night to arrange for a new Antoinette at the factory in Puteaux. By Tuesday evening, a new Model 6 was en route to Calais, even more lovely than her predecessor. She carried an improved V8 of 100 horsepower. At Sungate, Latham was called to the aeroplane shed by a levasseur, who handed him a small piece of metal. As somehow had become lodged, where it had shorted out the cable harness. "This is what stopped you," he smiled. Once more the weather soured, forcing Latham to spend his time motoring from Sungate to Calais and back, greeting well-wishers, keeping eye on the smothering fog bank that hung over the French coast. On Wednesday, July 21st, Latham was not surprised to learn that Louis Bleriot had arrived in Calais by train. No sooner had Latham ditched into the channel than Bleriot hastened to formally enter his name for the Daily Mail prize. Now the event shaped up as a race of the Dragonflies. People were skeptical that Bleriot's little short-span flyer would even stand a chance of surviving the turbulent channel winds at a long-winded race. Its 28-foot wingspan appeared toy-like beside Latham's craft with its 46-foot spread of wings. Bleriot was also 10 years older than 26-year-old Latham and had a wife and 5 children to think about. It was for them, in fact, that he was now in the channel race. As designer, builder, and chief pilot of the Bleriot company, his whole future was at stake. If he crashed, it would be a catastrophe. If he won, well, he would wait and see how many people rushed up to buy Bleriots and how many to buy Antoinettes. Thursday and Friday passed, and then Saturday, but the weather remained foul. At Sungate, Hubert Latham felt caged. Bleriot, quartered with his wife at a hotel terminus in Calais, sat moodily contemplating his bandaged left foot. On Saturday night, both men retired late, convinced the weather would remain poor for several days yet. Latham had asked Levasseur to awaken him should the weather improve during the night, but his friend was too far gone in slumber, when a distant drone suddenly brought the entire camp to its speed. Bleriot was on his way. Latham raced outside and stared seaward. A break in the weather had opened the heavens to his rival, and already the cloud bank was closing in again. He lit a cigar and stood apart from the others, looking off into space. History was being made while he had slept. Bleriot had not slept well. At 2:30, his foot paining him fearfully, he had arisen and taken a short motor drive to clear away. Then it was that he discerned a break in the weather, his one and only chance. He had put aside his crutches, climbed onto his flyer, and flown down the coast to Sungate and back. It was then that Latham had heard him. Landing, Bleriot filled his fuel tank, bade farewell to his friend Anzani, and once more took off, heading straight as the gulls fly for England. Barely skimming the channel waves, he groped on throughout the early dawn, without a watch, without a compass. At mid-channel, he became completely lost. He flew on. There was nothing else to do. He headed for where he believed North Pole Meadow should be, near Dover. Quickly outspeeding his escort destroyer, the Escopette, Bleriot waved to his wife, who was aboard, and crouched lower in the cockpit against the chill morning air. He felt wildly alone. 10 minutes had elapsed. He related afterward. I turned my head to see whether I am proceeding in the right direction. I am amazed. There is nothing to be seen. Neither torpedo destroyer, nor France, nor England. I can see nothing at all. I am lost. It is a strange position to be alone, unguided, without compass, in the air over the middle of the channel. I touch nothing. I let the aeroplane take its own course. I care not whither it goes. For 10 minutes I continue, neither falling, nor rising, nor turning. Then weather turns from bad to worse. Cloud cover thickens. And then a sudden heavy rainfall, but it turns out to be a blessing in disguise, as it cooled down his overheating Anzani engine, saving him from the same fate of Latham. And then, 20 minutes after I have left the French coast, I see the cliffs of Dover, the castle, and away to the west, a spot where I intend to land. What can I do? It's evident the wind had taken me out of course. I am almost at St. Margaret Bay. Now is the time to attend to the steering. I press the lever with my foot, and turn toward the west. Now indeed, I am in difficulties, for the wind here by the cliffs is much stronger, and my speed is reduced as I fight against it. Still steadily, I fly westward, hoping to cross the harbour and reach the Shakespeare Cliff. I see an opening in the cliff. Although I am confident that I can continue for an hour and a half, that I might indeed return to Calais, I cannot resist the opportunity of making a landing on this green spot. Once more, I turn my aeroplane, and describing a half circle, I enter the opening and find myself again over dry land. Avoiding the red buildings on my right, I attempt a landing, but the wind catches me. I stop my motor, and the machine falls. The first person Blériot saw on English soil was a fellow countryman, Charles Fontaine, a reporter from the Parisian newspaper Le Matin. Wildly waving the French tricolour, Fontaine rushed up to greet Bleriot, nearby scooping the rival London Daily Mail. It was 5:12 a.m. The crossing had taken 37 minutes, a half hour that made history. Bleriot's landing on North Pole Meadow left much to be desired. His propeller was broken, the engine mount torn loose, the undercarriage damaged. But then, Bleriot considered any landing he lived through a good landing. His face creased in a big smile. He jumped out, wincing as he came down on his sore foot. Hopping about, he was greeted by the first British subject to arrive, Peter Stamford, who embraced Bleriot, slapping his back and crying, "You made it! But we, of course!" The meadow soon filled with people, constables, autocars, flags, newsmen, interviewing everybody. The Coast Guard station's chief officer, who above all others should have been the first to see Bleriot approaching, ran up, admitting that it all had happened too suddenly. Bleriot's conquest of the English Channel captured the imagination of the world. Orders for Bleriot monoplanes poured in. Dressed in blue coveralls, Bleriot borrowed clothes from Hart Oberg, agent of the Wright Aeroplane Company, climbed onto the back of Rolls-Royce, and was driven into London for a round-the-clock race at the Victoria Station, and congratulatory lunch at Subway Hotel. While there, he received a telegram from Calais, signed by Hubert Latham. "Hope to follow you soon." Tears came into Bleriot's eyes. "The prize money," he said, lips trembling. I'll share it with Hubert." There was no need for that. Latham did not start that day, for the winds had risen and flying was unsafe. He waited instead until on Tuesday, July 27th. He rose at dawn, made a short trial flight in his new Antoinette, broke landing gear, fixed it, and finally, at 5:50 p.m., rose above the cliffs of Sungate, raced channelward, and streaked for Dover. On the English side, 40,000 spectators were waiting, cheering him on. A man of his courage was to be loved, admired. No matter that he was rain-sinker, he was a good sport, flying through the rain clouds, his cigar dead. Latham again heard his engines sputtering quit. This time he was within sight of the cliffs of Dover. He gracefully volplaned into the water, landing hard. He was thrown forward against the panel, smashing his goggles and cutting his face badly. He sat there, dolefully awaiting rescue. And then, what a commotion! Everyone to the rescue, whether they could get there or not. Out sped cutters, pinnaces and tugs. The sea was alive, with driven craft converging on a point. A steam pinnace from HMS Russell, a battleship of the British Home Fleet, reached Latham first, but a flyer asked to be taken to the dispensary aboard a French destroyer. The poor Antoinette, towed ignominiously back to Calais by the tug Calician, was lifted from the water and placed in storage. For Louis Bleriot, fame and fortune would come as the result of winning the Channel race. More than 100 orders for Bleriot monoplanes poured in, and until World War I broke out, they were among the most popular flyers on the continent. For Latham, there was also adulation for his good sportsmanship, further dazzling flights in the Antoinette in Europe and America, and finally, sudden death. Ironically, the end came not in a tempting fate in a flying machine, but under a trampling hooves of an enraged wild buffalo he had shot and wounded in the French Congo in 1911. This was the Aviation Vault. Hope you enjoyed it, and until next time, goodbye.